I'm Elda Hartley, producer of Films for a New Age. And in this series on mind-body relationship, our objective has been to develop an awareness of our potential, an awareness that we're so much more than we think we are. Now, those Kirlian pictures reveal an aspect of our being that we certainly have not been aware of, some sort of subtle emanation that can be photographed, can be seen by some psychics, and can be felt by the hands of a healer. In this film, we're going to deal with the last, the hands of a healer. These are pictures of normal fingertips, showing their surrounding field caught by the Kirlian process. But this is the fingertip of a healer, taken while she was administering the therapeutic touch. In the 16th century, when kings were thought to heal with the touch of a royal hand, when hospitals were little more than charnel houses and roots and herbs were the only medicines, a man named Paracelsus began to experiment with chemicals as drugs. He was scoffed at in his time, but today he's known as the father of modern scientific medicine. Here in the West, scientific healing, with emphasis on drugs and surgery, has been the dominant mode of treatment. Nevertheless, the tradition of religious healing has survived in some cultures with witch doctors, shaman, and dukuns. In others, with faith healers and medicine men. With shrines such as the one at Lourdes, which has recorded numerous miraculous cures. And even with a church, the Christian Science Church, founded by Mary Baker Eddy. This split between religious and scientific healing has been great until quite recently. But now, doctors are beginning to acknowledge the limits of drugs and surgery and to explore the role the mind plays in healing. One such study is carried on at the Menninger Foundation, where, with biofeedback equipment, the patient is able to see the part his mind plays in his body's reactions. The director of research at the Menninger Foundation is Dr. Elmer Green.
Biofeedback actually is the feedback of physiological signals to a person, gives him information about himself that he didn't know about. And biofeedback training is doing something with this information. In essence, you might say it's the answer to psychosomatic disease. Through biofeedback training, people can come towards psychosomatic health. Psychosomatic self-regulation can begin with biofeedback training. And of course, all of this leads into what we might call a science of consciousness, because it's all done in consciousness. There isn't any such thing as biofeedback training. There's only training in internal existential cues. As for instance, in this workshop, we're training people in temperature control. We do this with thermistors, or actually, I guess you might think of them as thermometers, attached to the forehead and to the hand. In this particular case, we're training people to warm up the hand.
Warmth is flowing into my hands. They are warm.
Dr. Green's wife and associate, Elise, is using almost hypnotic suggestion to reinforce the idea of warmth.
I can feel the warmth flowing down my arms into my hands.
And as they go through the training program, they learn how to make the hands get warm, merely as a visualization of warmth in the hands, and along with that goes cooling in the head. Now, the cooling in the head isn't much, except in the case of, for instance, migraine patients, and we found that a lot of them, people who have migraine, can get the migraine under control merely through a simple program in controlling the temperature of the hands.
A technique known as the laying on of hands has survived through the centuries, and today many healers use this method. Most famous of all is Elda Hartley. She willingly participates in scientific experiments such as this one, conducted by leading researcher and biochemist Sister Justice Smith.
This morning I have in my laboratory Dr. Elda Hartley, perhaps the best-known healer in the United States today. She's treating a sample of enzyme, namely trypsin. All of us have heard in the past of healings that have taken place by the laying on of hands. If no other place, at least in the New Testament, where it's recorded that Christ healed many by the laying on of hands. Today, however, many people have the idea that healing by this technique is due to either the fact that it's a miracle, that is, there's a divine intervention by God, or the illness was psychosomatic to begin with. In the experiments we're doing in my laboratory here, I think we're going to disprove both these theories. First of all, we're using enzymes rather than people, because it's a little hard to conceive of the idea that an enzyme can have psychosomatic tendencies. And furthermore, I can't believe that God is so capricious that he would increase the activity of this enzyme simply to make me happy. But the experiments will show that a healer, that is one who has the power of healing by the laying on of hands, can in fact cause a physical change in a biological tissue. Enzymes are biological catalysts. In fact, they're called the brains of the cell because they control all metabolic functions of each cell. I belong to a group of biochemists who believe that all illnesses are due to some malfunctioning enzyme. Now, if this be true, then any therapy, whether it be medicinal, physical, or paranormal, should affect the rate at which an enzyme reacts. In order to test this hypothesis, we want to determine whether or not a healer can affect a whole as well as a damaged enzyme. To do this, we've designed an experiment in which we make up a fresh sample of enzyme each morning, then divide that sample into 4 equal portions. The first of these we set aside as the control, do nothing to it. The second is given to the healer directly to be treated. The third sample is placed in a magnet. This is a very powerful 13,000 Gauss field. This is done in order to compare the magnetic field effect on the rate of enzymic activity with the effect produced by the healer's hands. Another small sample is placed under ultraviolet light in order to damage the structure of the molecule. Subsequently, this sample will also be treated by the healer. This is done because a healer is never asked to treat a well person. A spectrophotometer is used to compare the effect of the various treatments on enzyme activity. It measures the rate at which the enzyme is able to break down a protein. From these data, we can now calculate and compare the results. In my earlier research, I discovered that a high magnetic field will increase the rate of activity of an enzyme. In this present research, we have confirmed that fact. However, I have also found that the hands of a healer will have a comparable effect on increasing the rate of activity of this enzyme. It doesn't matter whether the enzyme is whole or whether it was first irradiated by ultraviolet light, which is known to damage it. There really is nothing supernatural, nor mysterious, nor occult about paranormal healing. It can be tested and measured and demonstrated in a scientific laboratory.
If paranormal healing can be tested and measured and demonstrated in a scientific laboratory, then even though we don't understand the force that brings it about, we can learn to use it. We can learn to help the sick, if not to totally cure them. An unorthodox technique similar to the laying on of hands is being taught by a nurse and a professor at New York University, Dr. Dolores Krieger. She calls it therapeutic touch.
Therapeutic touch is a conscious involvement of self, and at every point in the way you really should understand what it is you're doing, what it is you're trying to accomplish. You should also have some pretty good understanding of what's happening between you and the patient. I was very interested in the studies that Sister Justice Smith did on the effect of healing by laying on of hands on enzymes. I was also intrigued by other studies done by another biochemist by the name of Dr. Bernard Grod. What he did was to study the effects of laying on of hands on plants and animals. In his plant studies, he had the healer hold flasks of water and do to the water what he would do to people during the laying on of hands. This water was then used to irrigate an experimental group of plants that were sick. In a control group, instead of the water from the healer, the plants were irrigated by ordinary tap water. What happened was that following laying on of hands, the experimental group showed a very significant increase in the green matter, in the chlorophyll, in the plant. Now, I am a nurse, and as a nurse, I'm interested in the helping and healing of people. Consequently, when I found that there was this increase in chlorophyll, and I realized from my own studies in biochemistry that hemoglobin in people are, so to speak, a biochemical homologue of the chlorophyll one finds in plants, I began to realize that what one could do would be to test for the effects of healing in people by studying changes in their hemoglobin values. Consequently, I then did several large studies in hospitals in metropolitan New York.
Dr. Krieger selected 64 patients who had similar blood chemistry with equivalent hemoglobin values and hematocrit ratios. All of them were given the exact same treatment except for one thing. Half of them, the experimental group, were treated by graduate students who had learned to do therapeutic touch.
Temperature, probably that's the problem. All right, the technique. You've heard of therapeutic touch, haven't you? Sort of. Well, it doesn't hurt. That's one of the thing everybody wants to know about it first. What I'm going to do is do an assessment first, just to see which areas of your body need more attention than others. That's what I do. I just use my hands. So I do it quickly. Just to pick up a general impression. You see, do you feel anything? No. Okay, that's good. All right, see, now I know. I'm going to work first in the area of your chest, which seems to have a little bit of congestion. See, I feel it, like a little bit of pressure.
Having previously centered herself, she stays on center during the entire time so that she can channel and modulate the natural energies that continuously flow through our bodies. Using her hands as instruments, the sudden movement is an attempt to brush aside the areas of congestion and keep a sense of flow in the energy field.
See, the flow is starting now. I can feel it.
The flow is starting now. What she's feeling is the interaction between her field and that of the patient. Her sensitive hands are picking up cues, and where necessary, she directs energy to balance the energies of the healee.
So always, when I've emphasized an area like the solar plexus, I go up and clear. Just to make sure.
The intimacy involved in the healing act makes of it a highly personalized interaction in which the energy that flows from love and compassion strengthens the healing process.
And back again.
Both before and after treatment, samples of the patient's blood were taken.
Okay. Now the same hole, not the same
Repeat
hole.
samples were also taken on the control group at the same time.
Okay. Just put the arm.
Many natural factors can act to change the blood, such as diet, medication, and trauma. However, in this study, special care was taken to control for these variables.
How are we doing?
Hurts.
It hurts,
Yeah.
but it's coming very nicely. Anybody ever tell you you had pretty blood?
No.
No? Well, there's always a first for everything, right?
Okay.
Okay. Out we come.
Thank you. Don't come back.
Bend your arm. Okay. Come back. Don't come back again, you
Not
said?
today. Just get my act together here. Okay.
These samples were placed in a Coulter counter to measure the hemoglobin values. Hematocrit ratios were also measured. Of the 32 in the control group, there was no noticeable change either in hemoglobin content or hematocrit ratios. But the other half, in the experimental group, all had an increase in both hemoglobin values and hematocrit ratios.
Statistically, the findings were such that they could have happened by chance less than once in 1,000 times. What does this mean? Well, if you have more hemoglobin, then the body's metabolism is that much more efficient. It means more than this. It means that we can learn how to help each other in ways that we have previously not understood. It means that in some way we are obviously interconnected in a manner that is too subtle for us to currently understand.
Dr. Krieger conducts seminars all over the country for health professionals. She teaches how to help the sick by sharing with them the energy they need to deal with their illness themselves. Dr. Krieger says there's not only a channel between mind and body, but also between mind and mind, an energy that can be transferred from healer to healee, or even from healer to a piece of cotton.
We've been talking quite glibly about energy and transfer of energy. The thing that I haven't had a chance to tell you about the cotton is that the cotton will act as a facilitator, particularly with musculoskeletal problems. I use it a lot to teach people how to help themselves should they get injuries. And where I use this particularly is with people who are into sports. Then they have their their own little self-help device. A person, for instance, who has a fracture, who has a cast on, will actually feel the heat through the cast. You see, they actually, if you just put it over the cast, and it really accelerates healing. I think one aspect of the kind of energy that we're using is indeed of some kind of electrical nature. If this energy is of an electrical nature, then we must ask ourselves, where does it come from? Perhaps the best answer comes from the East. In the East, they have a concept of human energy that we as yet in the West do not comprehend. In Sanskrit, it is called prana, and it is concerned with the energy that underlies the organization that we call the life process, the organization that takes place in the regeneration of tissues during wound healing. Prana may be transmitted from one person to another, as in the practices of tantric yoga and hatha yoga. For this reason, I have often thought of therapeutic touch as a yoga of healing.
There are energy centers which in the East are called chakras, and this energy, perhaps electrical in nature, seems to emanate more strongly from these centers. A divining rod used on the average person will cross at these centers. Dr. Krieger uses this method to illustrate the fact that we don't stop at our skin, and that there is a patterned interaction between the field of the two people. Once a student begins to realize that there's a force that can be directed by the mind, he's taught to visualize.
What's a very important part in therapeutic touch is the ability to visualize. You have learned by now to use your mind efficiently enough so that you are explicitly directing energy. See, energy being even the visualization that you're forming in your mind. In order to literally create a visualization, you must have extremely good control of your mind. Most of it happens in the healing act. It really literally takes place in the mind, particularly in what we call the unconscious. You see, that whole well of symbolism that acts almost as a wellspring, for much of what we call illness, as well as what we call wellness, really springs from the integration between all of these fields.
Visualization is one thing, observation is another. These students have been sent into Washington Square to see what passers-by tell us about themselves.
Before I begin to do an assessment, I have done several other things. I have noted the way he carries himself, his posture, his stance, and so on. I have gotten some sense of any guarding that he is doing, any way in which he is protecting himself. I look at his face, get some sense of his emotional tone through his expressions. More importantly, what I have done is to center myself, and I stay on center throughout the entirety of the assessment. When you are on center, you seem to stand outside of yourself, and you can use yourself much more objectively. You are able to, rather than be part of the experience, you can stand aside and simply use yourself for the well-being of the healee.
If a person can train himself to sense the imbalance of energy in another person by visualization, observation, and by focusing his mind, we thought it would be interesting to see if Dr. Krieger's assessment of a patient was the same as that of his physician. Now, we knew to make this test valid, we had to find a medical doctor and his patient, both of whom Dr. Krieger did not know and had never seen before. A patient with a definite physical malady.
Dana, I want you to go into your relaxation procedure. Now get your body as totally relaxed as you can. Feel your whole body becoming very relaxed in a way that we've gone over many times. Very good. Sense this relaxation building very strongly in your body.
Alan Lundell, an associate of the eminent psychiatrist Dr. Alex Carlin, is a therapist trained in biofeedback. His patient, Dana Creno, suffers with migraine headaches and was referred to him by Dr. John Gundy, a pediatrician in Rye, New York. Dana has been working with biofeedback for 6 months and now has his migraine almost under control. It may be that it's so under control that Dr. Krieger will not be able to pick it up. Neither Dana nor Alan Lundell has ever seen Dolores Krieger before, nor she them. This was filmed in real time with no cuts, no editing of either sound or picture. We were all set to film the moment Dr. Krieger arrived.
Procedure worked. I mean, what do you do in order to sense an assessment of someone?
Certainly. Let me see if I can show you. Dana, all I'm going to do is to just try to get an idea of what it is that's the matter with you by just using my hands. And I'm not even going to touch you. But what I'm going to be doing, I'm just going to be bringing my hands about that far away from you. Okay? And there's no way that I'm going to hurt you, so if it's all right with you, I'd like to try. Okay, what I'm doing, Alan, is this. I'm simply trying to get some sense of any differences that I feel here on Dana, just using a basic assumption that he is an open system, that he has symmetry, so in terms of an energy field, it should feel the same on both sides, you see, since it's symmetrical. And what I'm doing is I'm just looking for something that you might call differences. It's not by sense of diagnosis, but rather an evaluation or an assessment, just of differences, things, little cues that suggest to me that one side is a little bit different than the other. That in terms of most healers, they would say there's an imbalance in energy.
Not talking about it intellectually doesn't interfere with the process?
No, it really doesn't. It's a very primitive thing. I won't say anything that's terribly clever, but just doing that.
That's right, I will.
You will. All right, I'll leave that up to you. Yeah. Okay. Now, what I just want to check one or two things after.
What about the person's attitude towards you? Does that affect your ability to diagnose?
No, it doesn't. In any real way. I'm not diagnosing, as you're aware. I'm trying to come up with some kind of an evaluation, which is a little bit different than diagnosis in the medical sense. In the medical sense, it's a classification, you see. What I'm just trying to do is to get a sense of imbalance of energy here. And I'm using my hands, particularly that part, you see, just to pick that up.
Do you feel ever when you're doing this an energy flowing through your hands? Are you picking up an energy?
You do, because, you know, obviously it's not a one-way thing. It's a matter of acting and interacting. There's a great many connectivities, you know, that you're involved with. Now, I'll tell you something. I know that he's going to for biofeedback. Where I feel what I would call tightness down in his legs, you know, just down in here.
Sort of a muscular tension?
Yeah, well, a muscular tightness, yeah, I would think something neurological is what I'm thinking of. It's not really major. I don't know that I'll be terribly successful, I'll tell you the truth.
Can you sense how accurate you're going to be when you're...
Well, I just said I'm going to be very successful. I suppose in that way it is. Yeah. I feel something down in here, in the sight of butterflies in your tummy, you know, which is understandable since we're grinding away with a camera. Frankly, I know a lot more about him by physical aspects, you see, having tried to size him up physically than I'm really getting in terms of...
Why don't you just tell us what you're getting, sort of sense as you go through just parts of the body? Like
It's not very much.
Like for example, at this end, what do you...
This is really where I think the problem is, to tell you the honest truth.
This is where I think the problem is, to tell you the honest truth. She spoke so low, we almost lost the line. After less than 4 minutes, Dolores Krieger had zeroed in on the seat of Dana's problem, migraine headaches, although at this point, he has it almost under control. It would seem to be definite proof that we do not stop at our skin, that there is a channel between mind and body that's wide open when we're in an altered state of consciousness. When the healer is relaxed and the healer is centered, perhaps then is when there's this transfer of energy that sort of charges the battery of the sick person and helps him heal himself.
You know, zero in a little bit better.
Visualization, observation, and meditation, the basics of the healing act. Meditation is an aid in focusing the mind, in learning to do what Dr. Krieger calls centering. And every student is told to center before attempting to heal.
So actually, the sounding board is yourself, and now you see why it's so important that where your motivation is, specifically in the interest of the patient, rather than your own ego structure. Why it's important for you to confront yourself, at least on that one question of why do I want to become a healer? You really got to understand that very well, because it is really a holistic involvement. In the end, you will find that you do indeed become a human support system for your healing. And essentially what you're beginning to find out is how do these energy systems work within yourself. By very everyday things, you can watch how your emotions float out of you. You see, if you just keep track of yourself, even for one day, you will be surprised how you're continually directing energy. I want whatever it is indeed that you want. For the person who wants to become a healer, it is not enough to simply want. What you must be willing to do, if you wish to share your energies with another person, is to discipline those energies, to learn how to direct them, to learn how to modulate those energies appropriately. You must be willing to take a look at yourself, at your motivations in terms of how you look at the healing act. More importantly, what you must be willing to do is to question yourself, confront yourself on why indeed it is that you wish to be a healer.
Do you want to be a healer because you want to be loved, or do you want to be a healer because you love? Dr. Krieger says love is a powerful ally in the healing act, that a directed mind motivated by love has almost limitless power. Viewed from this perspective, therapeutic touch is not a magical ability that's accessible only to a gifted few. Rather, it's a normal but latent component of our human potential. And It's important not so much for the phenomenon itself, it's important because it's a window. It's a window that reveals an enormous human frontier. The evolution of individual consciousness in community with others. We seem to be drawn with increasing insistence by this image of human possibility.